Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining me today. Great to see so many people join us yet again for another webinar. I'm going to be totally honest with you. Sadly, today is not going to be quite as interactive and quite as much fun as maybe some of the previous ones where we've done lots of live demos, because we're talking about DfE standards, guidance, bits and pieces like that. Now, very, very important stuff, but obviously not a lot to demo in that scenario. So we've got a mixture of people on the call today. We've got some leaders within the educational community. We've got some IT managers. We've got technicians. We've got all sorts of people. So we're going to be aiming this sort of fairly high level. So I apologise for those of you that are pretty technical. We are going to be going at a slightly higher pace or slightly higher angle than normal. But the purpose of today then is to talk about the DfE's guidelines and their standards. Okay, what we're looking at there, I'm hoping some of you may be aware of it. It might be a new term and a new concept to many of you. So really want to introduce those and understand why they're important and kind of how we can align our IT strategy to meet the DfE's expectations of us within our schools. So as a bit of an agenda, we're going to talk about what those DfE standards are and why they're important. We're going to talk about networking and the standards that the DfE lay out around networking, around cloud services, server infrastructure that you might have on-prem, devices, laptops, tablets, etc., that you may be purchasing. Probably the key one, and something that lots of people are kind of embarking on now, is our security. And when we say security, we've used that word rather than cyber, because security isn't just cyber. So we've got other considerations there as well, things like safeguarding, etc., etc. And then we've got some digital governance standards. So what are we doing around our policies and procedures? So the aim of today really is to run through each of the standards, give you a bit of an idea of what they are, in case you've not seen them, and also maybe just to float a few ideas around some of the things that you might want to do within your organisation to try and align to some of those. And then hopefully at the end of it, we're going to have a bit of time for questions. So let's get underway, shall we? So again, I apologise if I bore everybody. I'll try and keep this entertaining as much as I can. But why use the DfE standards? Okay, so basically, first thing to point out, this is not law. You do not have to do these things, okay? However, it's kind of guide rail or guardrails, I should say, that the DfE have laid down, saying, look, we really encourage everybody to make sure that you're considering various things when you enter into the world of networking, okay? When you're looking at your digital strategy, when you're looking at what you're doing around your internet connection. These are ideas and things for you to consider and to be thinking about. So you don't have to do this stuff, although I think as you go through it, you'll realize that it's largely common sense, all right? And if you're not doing those things, you probably should be doing those things, okay? The whole point is once you've gone through those standards and you sort of try to align yourself to it, you should be in a position where you can make more informed decisions. And the idea being that you have a really good foundation to build upon within the school to make sure that your technology stack is meeting kind of the current expectations, is up to date, is patched, is secure, you're buying energy efficient equipment, you're moving in the right direction is the aim, okay? And the last thing to say is that you can't really meet all these standards unless you have everybody within your organization on board with that idea. So some of the standards will be really targeted at the IT department and the IT manager. Some of these standards are aimed at the senior management team and shifting policy and kind of training and understanding across the environment. And some of it will be requirements from the staff themselves to ensure they embark and they kind of buy into the training and understand its importance within the school. So how do we use the DfE standards? First thing to say is that on the Gov website, we'll show you that in a second, there are all of the standards that the DfE lay out around technology. All right, you'll be aware that there's loads of standards around everything else, around the curriculum and teaching and learning and other expectations around running a school. The bit we're focusing in really is just the technology space. But what I encourage you to do is go to that website, find all those standards, okay, and read through each of them and ask yourself, have you got a plan to meet that? Are you on a journey to meet that standard? Or have you not even thought about it? And if you've obviously not even thought about it, then you should probably start thinking about it, okay? If you've already met it, brilliant. And I'm sure in many cases, a lot of you will have already met a lot of these standards, okay? There's some really basic stuff in there, and then there's probably some thought-provoking pieces in there as well. Once you've done that sort of initial assessment, do we meet all these standards? You should end up with a kind of a gap analysis of going, well, actually, we haven't even thought about that. There's a conversation I need to have with the head teacher. Here's a conversation I need to have with the IT manager, maybe. And then go and talk to kind of get everybody in a room and go, right, here's all our gaps to meet the standards. Do we have the expertise within the school to meet these standards, or do we need to go and seek sort of outside assistance? And there'll be some pieces like cyber, for example, where I probably encourage you to go and do that to make sure you get it right. So where is this stuff? Well, it's on gov.uk. Probably the easiest way to find it, in all honesty, is just to go to a search engine and type in meeting digital technology standards in schools and colleges. And it should be the top thing at the top of the list. And you'll see that there's a whole bunch of different standards, and these standards will change. They evolve as time goes on, okay? Because of course technology evolves, everything shifts in time, and these standards will be updated. They're updated kind of on a bit of an ad hoc basis, but you'll generally find that they're reviewed and modified every year. Okay, so go and find these standards, have a read through them. We're going to cover off quite a few of them today. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's probably all the big hitters. And those standards are kind of, in my mind anyway, we've bunched them up into these 4 sections, okay, where we're talking about the cloud and the standards around using cloud platforms, the standards around using on-prem servers, the standards around your devices, your tablets, your laptops, etc., your networking. And when we say networking, I mean both your LAN, so your local area network, and also your WAN, so what you're doing around your internet connectivity into the school. Security covers off things like cyber, and digital governance is really about policy and about kind of what you're doing to shift the way of thinking within the school. So let's start then with networking. It's probably the easiest go-to, and this is something that comes around every 3 years or so, maybe 5 years. People are reviewing their internal infrastructure and understanding, do we need to replace our wireless access points? Do we need to replace our networking equipment? What are we doing about our broadband? So let's start with what the DfE say around your switching infrastructure. So your physical, you've got various cabinets around the school with lots of boxes in there with blinking lights all over it. We call these things switches. They connect everything together, all right? So the network switches should be fast, reliable, and secure connections to users for both wired and wireless. So obviously the idea of it being fast is always a key thing. Generally, if you're upgrading for the same thing, it's not really an upgrade, is it? So things have come on massively, right? So I mean, years and years, 10 years ago, we didn't need gigabit or 10 gigabit networks in the school, largely because the data we were sending across it wasn't as big. We weren't dealing with massive video files as such. We probably had 100 devices in the school, maybe. Now we've got 6, 7, 8,000 devices in many cases. We've got students walking in with mobile phones. They're connecting to the wireless, whether or not they're actually logging into the wireless or not, the signal is still bouncing around. So, but on the physical networking side of it, on the physical switching side of it, we're looking to improve the speed. So we always need to improve the speed because technology is moving on and we're getting more and more and more devices into the school. So that's an obvious one, right? Have a platform that can essentially manage the network switching infrastructure. That's another key one, all right? We don't want to be walking around with laptops, patching into switches and trying to individually configure them. We're looking for something that centrally manages our network estate, and ideally something that manages both our physical switching estate and our wireless estate under one banner. And there's some great, obviously there's a whole bunch of solutions out there which are correct for schools. Things like Unify is very common. Aruba, so HPE solution is very, very, very common, and they have central management platforms that allow you to manage obviously all of your physical switching and your wireless in a central cloud platform, so you don't need a controller on site, and that ties in with a later requirement, which is to try and push towards the cloud where possible. Network switches with security features to protect users and data from unauthorized access. Simple one, that's usernames and passwords, right? You don't want to just leave these things open. Make sure you reset your admin usernames and passwords. Hopefully that's a fairly straightforward one for the IT technical people amongst you. And the core network switches should be connected to at least one UPS to reduce the impact of outages. So absolutely. So it does say they're core networks. So it's not necessarily expecting you to have UPSs in all of the, in A block and B block and C block, but certainly where A block, B block and C block come back to the central location, that's where we call your core switch. That should be protected by UPS. Does two things. One allows a little bit of uptime for the switch. Depending on what type of switch you've got, you may need to shut it down gracefully. and that UPS allows you to do that. But the important thing really in the switching world is that it's acting as a bit of a surge protector. If you have some sort of fluctuation within your power, it's not going to blow your switch up. So all pretty simple, aren't they? You know, for the technical people on the call going, yeah, that's fine. I've got that sorted. No problem at all. Good. Let's talk about wireless. Okay. So again, they're encouraging you to look for Wi-Fi solutions that have been approved by the Wi-Fi Alliance. And obviously the key there, generally, if you're buying a pretty modern wireless solution from a well-known vendor, you'll be okay on that front. Having fully functional signal from your wireless network throughout the school and college. So some people will struggle with that, and budget might be the reason that we're struggling to get full Wi-Fi. It's also, this is guidance, remember. This isn't, you don't have to have this, okay? It can be driven by your senior management team. You know, if you don't have wireless across the field, it doesn't mean you've got to have wireless across the field. It might just be that the senior management team are saying, actually, we're not worried about wireless in the field. We just need to make sure we've got it in the IT suites in the library. That's fine. If that's the way that the school's strategy is, or technology strategy is, they're going to drive digital learning in certain areas, then that's absolutely fine. Obviously, in most cases, I think most schools are pushing towards the idea of having kind of anywhere learning. So we can walk into any room, get on Wi-Fi and move forward. So have a think about that. Have a solution that can centrally manage the wireless network. Going back to that idea of centralized management. And again, I encourage you to find solutions. Try and, wherever possible, try and keep your switching and your wireless probably with the same vendor. Gives your IT team a bit of a break, means that they've got one single pane of glass to manage everything. Great for cyber security when we're doing a forensic investigation, let's say. We're not logging into lots of different platforms and trying to kind of stitch stuff together. We can see where data enters the wireless network, traverses across a network and does something horrible maybe. We can see all of that from one platform, so it speeds lots of things up. And then obviously installing security features to stop unauthorized access. So that continues across all those, across everything we do, right? So and we'll talk about security and cyber a little bit later. But ultimately, what we're talking about there is ensuring that we're using something like maybe certificate-based authentication rather than WEP keys. So WEP keys are easily hackable now or breakable now. You know, if you're using WEP as a security standard, then you probably need to be thinking about something a bit more advanced than that. But obviously, it goes right up to using things like certificates, where you actually physically put a file on every computer, and it's only those computers that have that file that are able to connect to the wireless. So, so there are a range of bits and pieces there that you can do around the wireless stuff. So the key probably one here, I think, really is around broadband. Okay, a bit of a shift. Lots of people probably aren't aware. But firstly, you should have a really good internet connection by now. Okay, if you're still using ADSL, you're still using ISDN, all that stuff's about to stop working. All right, in fact, I think it probably has stopped working, but I think it's been extended for a while. But the end goal here really being that is a defunct technology. Okay, and it's used commonly. I see it a lot in kind of rural locations, places where you can't easily get fiber connectivity or lease lines, Ethernet into schools because they're in really rural locations. There is a program called Connect the Classroom, which is run by Department for Education, that actually provides funding to allow you to go and get a better level of connectivity. They will pay to some degree to be digging up roads and putting connectivity in. They'll also give you funding towards your switching and your wireless solutions as well, if that needs kind of lifting up and updating. They appreciate that rural schools probably don't have the funding that inner city schools have. Also in areas where that are slightly deprived, should we say, then those areas will also able to be eligible for the Connect Classroom program. There's a big list available online, so let's just go and have a look at that if you think you might qualify. Probably the second one is the one that most people don't realise, right? Schools and colleges should have a backup broadband connection. Okay, so lots of schools have got an internet connection, but probably don't realise that they really should have a second one. Okay, they should have a backup line. Doesn't need to be as powerful, doesn't have to be of any particular spec, it doesn't have to meet your primary line. However, it should be capable to run, learning and digital learning within the school. So make sure that you spec that appropriately. But also there's a few considerations there. Don't just go and get another line from the same provider. And we'll talk about why in a second. And then lastly, when we talk about broadband and internet connectivity, something we need to be considering is safeguarding. And we need to be thinking about how we're going to protect the students, how are we going to make sure that we've got a layer of web filtering. Is web filtering on its own enough? Do we need to be able to be monitoring their activity actually across the school as well? But there's another guide called Keeping Children Safe in Education. which again is published by the government, and that's all about safeguarding as a whole. It's not specifically about technology safeguarding, but obviously, as you can imagine, technology's got quite a big part to play in it. The current standard is a 2023 version. By September 2024, new version will be the 2024 version. So I encourage you to go and have a look at that. There's a whole section around what you should be aiming to do around things like filtering and keeping students safe, and it does tie quite heavily into your broadband requirement. Okay, but I want to focus back on that point too, just something to point out. Okay, and we see this sadly quite a bit. So I've got a school up in front of us here, and most schools have got an internet line. Well, I won't say most schools. I'm going to assume every school, right, in the UK has got an internet line of some sort. So they typically got one line. Now that's great, but obviously if that line fails, if something goes wrong with it, the school's down. Now, if you've embraced cloud technology, if you're using Microsoft or Google, if you're using online tools, you're using Timetable Rockstars or anything like that, then effectively your school's a bit stuck, isn't it? It's not going to be able to get to some of its documents and files and things that are now stored in the cloud. And there's a real good argument to keep some of your technology on premise. Okay, and there's a big argument that happens in the industry. I'm not going to get into that argument today. Some people want to keep stuff on prem, some people want to put stuff in the cloud, some people sort of take a bit of both. But if you are heavily dependent upon the cloud, it really is time to think about putting a second line in. Okay, so there we've got 2 internet connections coming in. Now the eagle-eyed amongst you will start to panic, because hopefully you can identify that the issue is when you get a second line, if you just go back to your internet provider and say, I want another line from the same provider, then what happens is effectively those 2 lines pretty much go back to the same exchange. So everything, maybe aware, everything goes back to the BT network ultimately, unless it's a new altnet provider where they're building their own network across the UK. So that's great, but if something happens at the exchange, if something happens with the internet provider's equipment, then both your lines are going to go down at the same time. All right, so bear that in mind. We need to be thinking about what happens when the connectivity partners has an issue. Are both our lines going to go down? But also, both those internet lines in my example are coming into the school on the same side of the school, probably going through the same duct and underneath the ground. Therefore, they're sitting next to each other. So, of course, what happens when our little rat friend, our mouse, comes along and bites through both of our internet lines together because they're both sat next to each other where they're coming into the school? We're going to lose both our lines. Okay, so it's really important that we open up the idea of what we call diverse routing. All right, the idea is that you see those 2 lines deliberately different colors now. The colors, the idea being that one's from one provider, maybe one's a Virgin line, maybe one's an FTTP service from one of the altnets, and the other line might be a BT line, might be coming from a provider, a school's broadband, somebody like that. But also there, now think about, okay, right, I've got 2 lines, they're both separate, brilliant, no worries at all, but hang on a minute, what are you doing about web filtering? Okay, because if your web filtering is coming from your provider and it's being, and your big web filter is hosted at the other end of your internet connection, what happens when you fail over to your failover line? All right, are you going to have the same level of web filtering, or did you just buy another line from the same provider with web filtering on the other end? So how are you managing that? Do you need to start thinking about moving your web filtering local again, using various other kind of perimeter firewalls and security devices to manage that internally? So there's some challenges there, and there isn't a right or wrong answer. It's whatever's right for the senior management team, the IT manager of the school. But there are some considerations that you need to think about. Right, let's talk about cloud servers and devices. Okay, obviously we've bunched these 3 things together. They are 3 really different things. We've effectively got cloud services that sit up in Microsoft, Google, bits and pieces like that. We've got servers that are potentially hosted inside the school still, and then we've got all of our end user devices, laptops, tablets, whatever VR devices. Maybe you've got VR equipment. It'd be cool if you have. So, but here are the standards then. So all servers around servers, I should say, all standards around servers. All servers and related storage platforms should continue to work if any single component fails. Brilliant. Servers and related storage platforms must be secure and follow data protection legislation. All servers and related storage platforms should be energy efficient and set up to reduce power consumption while meeting user needs. And all server and related storage platforms should be kept and used in an appropriate physical environment. Okay, so there's a few bits that we need to think about there. We're talking about effectively high availability, the top one. We're talking about data protection, the second one. We're talking about energy efficiency and our net zero target. And we're talking around physical security and the appropriateness of your server room, perhaps. So again, quite a widespread thing when we're just talking about servers. But here's some ideas for you to take away. Okay, some of these are real common sense, and the techies amongst you will be going, "Yep, that's fine. I can do all that stuff, no problem at all." So if you have got servers on site still, then high availability is probably key. What you need to ask yourself a question: what happens if the servers stop? What's the impact on the school? More importantly, what's the impact on teaching and learning? Okay. One way to achieve high availability is to put multiple power supplies in the back of your servers, so that if one power supply fails, it's probably the most common thing to go on a server. It just kicks in with the other power supply. Making sure that effectively our switches are linked in such a way that if any single switch fails and our connectivity fails, it just routes through a different switch. Okay, making sure we've got more than one server maybe that can take the workload of all the other stuff. So if one whole server fails, all these workloads, these virtual machines as we refer to, fail over to the other box, and we deem that high availability. Techies amongst you, I'm sure you've got that all nailed as it is, as it stands at the moment. We have this concept of N plus 1, 2, 3, whatever it is, to be able to kind of ramp up our infrastructure. And that unfortunately requires sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 times the cost to achieve that high availability. There's some obvious ones: offsite backups, okay, warranties, care packs. What happens if the motherboard and the server fails? How quickly is it going to get replaced? I appreciate that some of the secondary schools and colleges, your budget is probably slightly larger than some of the primary schools, and certainly those primary schools in rural locations. You may well just have a single server sat in a cupboard somewhere. Ask yourself a question: what happens if that dies? Okay, how quickly are you going to be able to replace it? How old is it? Is it out of warranty? Do you have an extended care pack on that? Is somebody going to come out and fix it within 24 hours, or are you going to wait a week and a half for a spare part that we ordered on eBay? All sorts of questions that you need to be considering around the impact straight away. Licensed patch software. Obviously, licensing is key. If you're using third-party app services, bits and pieces, make sure they're licensed, because if they're not licensed, you're probably not entitled to get patched and to get security updates and application updates. If you're not getting security updates, then you're potentially opening up a bit of a hole for a security vulnerability, and certainly don't want to be getting kind of ransomware and going down that road. So making sure everything's licensed, patched, that's key within all this, the server standards requirement. A secure location, make sure that this isn't just sat under the desk in the server for the whole school isn't sat under the desk in the IT suite and the student can kick it and turn it off. Make sure it's in a locked area, it's air-conned, it's got everything it needs. Procure green. What that means is basically when you're going out and buying a new hardware, infrastructure, server switches, whatever, if you're doing that as part of a tender, really there is an obligation now to be asking about energy efficiency, okay? Because the government is driving us towards that net zero aim and looking to be greener than we are than we have ever been. So you really should be asking what's the energy efficiency and taking that into consideration when you're procuring equipment. Ultimately, it's going to help drive down the school's electricity bill, right? So make sure we're doing that. For a purely commercial reason, obviously, there's a much bigger and better reason to do that, which is the environment. So probably something people don't really follow very often is do not store end user devices in the server room. Okay, sounds weird, doesn't it? Lots of people just have a pile of laptops sat in the server room, but they have got batteries in them, right? And in my career, I have seen it happen where batteries explode. Okay, and they do set on fire. It does happen. So be mindful of what you've got in the server room. You've got some really expensive equipment in there. And that £200 laptop or £400 laptop that just blew up just wiped it all out. So use a store cupboard, and preferably not next to the server room, things like that. But you know, this stuff does happen. Obvious ones: don't put liquids in there. You know, don't have your lunch over the server. That's an obvious one, isn't it? But also, the DfE advised that probably don't build your server room with Windows in it. Okay. Easy to break, easy to get in, easy to steal your server, and then you're in a whole world of governance pain because actually you've got all this sensitive information that's now just been nicked and taken out of the school. So don't build it next to Windows, or place your servers in areas where there are windows, or classrooms. The classroom piece is probably more to do with the impact on the learning environment for students in the classroom next door. It's going to be hot, it's going to be noisy, it's probably not ideal. Same with cabinets and switching cabinets. Probably try to put them in classrooms if you can. Appreciate that's difficult. Because there's only a limited amount of space. The biggest one all day long, anybody who's a techie must have seen it. Walk into a server room and the server room is underneath the toilet. Okay, there's a toilet on the first floor and there's a big pipe coming out and the pipe goes over the top of the server rack. It's a no-go. All right, that will leak. It will, something will go wrong. It will drip all over you, all over the rack, and it will ruin all your hardware. Okay, and trust me, it will happen at 1 o'clock in the morning when no one's there as well. So don't put it in the boiler house with the caretaker stuff. You know, that's another given. Just think sensibly about where you're putting it. You know, I appreciate it's not, IT's not always been the highest agenda. It's been shoved in, the server gets put in cupboards, gets shoved in the caretaker's area, gets shoved in a classroom somewhere. Give it the respect it deserves, all right? So let's move from servers onto cloud. Okay, something we're all kind of embarking on. Lots of us have already kind of jumped into our Microsoft or our Google environments. We're using more and more cloud services than we've ever used before in the education sector. So the DfE's advice is to move to the cloud where possible. Okay, so it's that black and white. They are saying move to the cloud where you can. Okay, and try not to use on-prem equipment. That's up to you whether or not you need to do that. Again, this is not law. You don't have to do these things. It is all part of your technology strategy. It's down to you to decide whether or not you do these things, whether that's what they're expecting. So, but if you move to the cloud, you've still got data protection. You've still got data legislation that you need to be aware of. All right. If you are buying into the Microsoft or Google environment, you can feel pretty confident that that stuff's sealed off, but you'll still need to speak to your DPO and make sure that the relevant sort of paperwork is in place. But if you are buying into up and coming ed tech organizations that are building some sort of cloud service, make sure you've got some sort of kind of document in place around what they're doing with your data, all right, and how they're managing it and how they're processing it. ID and management tools, well, that's baked in again to the Google and the Microsoft stuff. Definitely look at utilizing that and using SSO wherever possible rather than their own ID management systems. You don't want to log into that third-party SaaS application that, you know, that's got its own username and password, and then you've got your Microsoft account, another login to another platform, another login to another platform. Try and use SSO. Try and use everything to get everything to log in with your Microsoft account. All right. If it doesn't log in with the Microsoft account, probably question that piece of software. Cloud solutions should work on a range of devices and be available when needed. In other words, what we're saying there is don't shoehorn yourself into one particular vendor, one particular brand. Don't just go Apple, all right, because it's cool. You know, ask yourself about whether or not that's going to be fit for purpose in 3 and 5 years' time. And make sure the appropriate data backup is in place. So again, backup something that just kind of resonates through all of these things, making sure that we back stuff up, and you'll see it again and again and again as I talk. So a couple of ideas then. Embrace Microsoft and Google. I'm sure lots of you already done that. They are really the two go-tos in terms of the cloud technology for education. There are obviously lots of other players there. That isn't to discredit other services, but they are kind of the leaders at the moment. Audit your services rather than your servers. If you speak to me in the past, you'll know that I say that quite a lot. What I mean by that is don't just say we've got a server or we've got 5 servers. Ask yourself, what's that server doing? All right. Lots of people think moving to the cloud is lifting their file server and putting it in Microsoft Azure in a big cloud environment. What we're actually meaning there is, what does that server do? Is it a file server? Okay. Is it a SIM server? Is it an MIS? What is the thing? What is the service that's being delivered by that server? If it is a file server, you don't need to build a new file server. You need to think about, how do I move my files maybe to something like SharePoint or to Google Drive or to wherever it needs to go to, and get rid of the idea of a server, because then I don't have to worry about Windows and the operating system and patching it and looking after it and all that stuff. That's all taken care of me. Simplifies my world. You should be looking to simplify and consolidate wherever you can. Okay, and make your life, if the technical people, make your life a bit easier. Ensure encryption, absolutely key one. Anything you're doing in the cloud, as soon as it's traversing the internet, needs to be encrypted in flight. Probably, well, it does need to be encrypted at rest, really, as well, depending on the data you're storing. Certainly, if it's got people's names and information or anything like that, it needs to be encrypted in flight and at rest. So make sure encryption's on top of the agenda. Data protection contract with your vendor. Again, going back to the idea of a third-party provider, make sure you've got a contract, a piece of paper that explains what they do with your data. Okay, how are they processing it? How do they store it? How do they manipulate it to deliver their application? Because if it goes wrong and they get in trouble, you could be in trouble for signing up for it. Be platform agnostic. Don't just buy Apple because you love Apple. All right, I've got nothing against Apple, love Apple, but it's not necessarily always the right solution. Right? Maybe there's a great use for iPads in the library, let's say, but actually my Chromebooks are particularly good in English, let's say, and the science department need Windows devices because they've got various kind of data loggers and stuff that plug in via USB, and then bits of software that run on 10 years old that are running on their Windows devices. So it's about making sure your school as a whole is platform agnostic. Make sure that you're not being driven by one particular department that's got particularly keen interest in IT and shoving you in one direction as a whole school. Not necessarily the right thing to be doing. So be a little bit mindful of that. And then obviously backup, right? Cloud again. Yes, all your stuff's in the cloud, but you can still lose it. You can still delete it. You can still get rid of it. If the deputy head leaves and you delete the user account, and let's say using Office 365, then you've got 90 days until that deputy head's mailbox will be deleted from Office 365, and you will never be able to get that data back again. Okay, so you need to be backing it up. If you get a year down the line, the head says, "Oh, I need John's old mailbox because I need an email from 2 years ago." That's gone. Okay, you're not getting that back unless you've got some sort of backup. So there are lots of solutions out there now. Veeam, Acronis, people like that that are able to back up. Skykick maybe is another one to mention. But they can back up your mailboxes, your team sites, your SharePoint environment, your Google Drives, your Google Mail. All those sort of cloud services can be backed up and consumed at a relatively reasonable price. Okay. So last one on this section then, laptop, desktop and tablet standards. This one's fairly straightforward. I think lots of us have been asking ourselves these questions for quite a while, but devices should meet educational needs and support digital technology strategy. Okay. Devices should be safe and secure. A bit grey that, isn't it? Let's be honest. Devices should meet or exceed the minimum requirements, no problem, and make sure devices are energy efficient and they're brought and disposed of sustainably. Okay, so that end one's quite important actually. So, ultimately, how are you getting rid of your devices? Yes, we're using disposal. I hope we should be. If we're not, we definitely should be. But ultimately, where are they going? Can they be reused? Are you looking at remanufactured or refurbished equipment? If you are, great. That's a brilliant move in the right direction. You can send your old devices back to certain manufacturers. They'll take the minerals and bits and pieces out of the motherboard and remanufacture new equipment rather than just throwing it in a tip and burying it under the ground and then going and mining new materials out of the earth to build new laptops. So there's a green element to that, all right? But other possible solutions to the other pieces are to create a technology strategy. All right, what is the device you're going to use? You don't have to use the same device across the school, but maybe what I'm encouraging you here is say you need to engage with your senior management team, or the senior management team maybe need to engage with the IT department. But we all need to sit down and have a conversation about where's the school going as a strategy. All right, are you going full head first into the Apple ecosystem? If you are, nothing wrong with that. But is it going to meet the teaching and learning needs everywhere, across all departments, and be sensible in 3 years' time? If it is, great, crack on. Are you going to go headfirst into Google? Are Chromebooks the right solution across everything? If they are, brilliant. Maybe costs and bits and pieces come into that. Obviously, we all know Chromebooks are a lot cheaper. So maybe that's the right thing for the school. I'm not saying it is or it isn't, but I'm suggesting that you kind of look at a strategy that gives you the agility to move across platforms if you need to. All right. Ensure you can centrally manage all devices. Another key one, if you've got a whole bunch of iPads, you've got a bunch of Chromebooks, you've got a bunch of Windows devices, how do you manage them all? Do you have to log into 3 different management platforms to go and do that? Technologies like Intune, Microsoft's Intune, are probably the go-to here if you are in that environment, because you can manage iPads, Chromebooks, Windows devices, all that, and mobile phones, all that sort of stuff across your Intune platform. You can apply policy, you can lock those devices down, and it's getting more and more powerful. And for the real techies amongst you, you can even take group policy details. You go into Sysfile and grab the group policy IDs out. You can paste those things into Intune and get all the power of group policy through Intune. So bear that in mind. Key thing there, enforcing safeguarding around those devices. All right, what are we doing about making sure we're protecting the students, not just in the school, but also probably when they go home? Okay, so we've probably got agent-based web filtering. I hope we have. If we haven't, maybe we need to be looking at that. Enforcing security. How are we going to log into these devices? 16-character passwords are brilliant, fantastic, or let's be serious, 8-character passwords are great for our year 10s and year 11s, but maybe an 8 to 10-character password for a 6-year-old might be a bit of an ask. So actually, what are we doing around passwords? Are we looking at vendors that provide picture-based logins? Are we looking at biometrics? Are we looking at fingerprints and those sorts of things? Right? How are we going to do that from an endpoint, from a device level? Obviously, you'll be aware Windows devices have things like facial ID and iPads and bits and pieces and Chromebooks where you can log on with your face. Maybe that's an option, but then you're entering the world of what are you doing around data security for your students, and you've got photos of their faces. So it escalates. Ensure they are fit for purpose and not just a fad, all right? That's probably a bit of a dig at the Apple piece. What I'm saying there is, look, we know, and I will argue all day long that, 10 years ago, 8 years ago, schools bought thousands and thousands and thousands of iPads. They brought them all in, and probably 90% of those in the UK are now sat in cupboards with dust on them, all right, and they're just not being used. So bear in mind also that they age so quickly, and suddenly you're in a position where those things aren't being used anymore because they don't run the latest app, they don't run the latest bit of software. So just think about future think when we're thinking about some of these devices, right? Can they run your application security tools? Again, so let's say from an IT perspective, you've got your antivirus, you've got maybe your EDR solution, you've got your remote management, you've got your ability to dial into the devices, but it's all on a piece of Windows software, right? You've got you've got a safeguarding application that runs on Windows devices that you can't install on Chromebooks. Big hole in your strategy there straight away. So think about this and make sure you're using the right tools. Not saying that you shouldn't use Chromebooks, just saying you need to find a piece of software that works agnostically across everything. Right, nearly there. We're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity standards very quickly. So security side. So this one is probably the one that's a bit more interesting, okay, in terms of there might be some new stuff here. So this is the DfE standard. This is what DfE are advising you to do. So conduct a cyber risk assessment annually and review it every term. All right. Now, I imagine there'll be a lot of people here that have never conducted a cyber risk assessment. Okay. So DfE are advising that you should do that. Create and implement a cyber awareness plan for students and staff. That's about training, about getting people to understand how important cyber is. Secure digital technology and data with anti-malware and a firewall. Okay, absolutely fine. I'd probably argue you need to go a bit further than that, in all honesty. Control and secure user accounts and access privileges. That's about making sure that you haven't got all your students logging in with the same username and passwords everywhere. License digital technology and keep it up to date. It goes back to that idea of licensing software so that you can keep it up to date and patch it and secure it and make sure that that you're on top of that stuff. Develop and implement a plan to back up your data. There's backup again. Well, that's a given, isn't it? On the cybersecurity side, and report cyber attacks. Now, I challenge you: who has a very, very solid plan of what to do if you have a cyber incident? If your school's been ransomed, you walk in and everything's down. You've been ransomed. You have no idea where your data is. It could have been downloaded and then could be on the dark web, ready to be released. You might be sitting there thinking, does it really matter if the Year 7's homework's been leaked on the darknet? You could argue that it is or it isn't important, but the important thing is what you're doing about your SIMS data. You've got your parents' details in there. You've got social security information in there. You've got a whole wealth of information that could be stored inside your MIS platform. Reports, behaviour, safeguarding information that's in there that's now out there on the dark web. So just the information about a student and who their parents are. If you're in certain sectors or areas of the country, then you might find that just that information alone is a concern. You can have a lot of angry parents, put it that way. So a couple of things we can do around cyber. All right, this is not exhaustive, but just as much as we could fit on that slide, really. But conduct a cyber risk assessment and annually review it every term. The answer's in that question, all right? Go and do a cyber risk assessment. What do we mean by a cyber risk assessment? That is sitting down and asking yourself, in the event that we were breached, what are the risks, okay? Have we got data in the system that we just cannot afford to leak out of the school? Have we got how would they gain access? Is it a physical access problem or is it a digital access problem? Are we using what's the financial implication to the school if we do get breached? Okay, what's the reputational damage that could happen? All right, that's the risk assessment. What are the concerns? And review it every term, right? Because it does change. A lot of cyber changes and new technologies. Who knows what threat will be under in a year's time? Get assistance from a cyber partner. That's probably a key thing. It's fair to say that if you've got lots of experience, you've come from a cyber background, brilliant. Then I encourage you to take your expertise and leverage it. But it's fair to say that if you're an IT person, there is a huge difference between an IT person and a cyber person. Those of you that know me will know that I'm an IT person. I don't always pretend to be a cyber person. We have Christian within our organization who runs our cyber team. And has grown up and spent his last 15, 20 years being dedicated to the cyber security industry. Okay, so There's a whole world of changes that are happening there. And we need to be on top of that. And it's very difficult to be the IT person and be on top of your cyber side. So I'd encourage you to reach out to a partner that can keep on top of that for you, bring new threats, new ideas, and ways of meeting those to your table rather than you need to keep on top of it. Keep your documentation up to date. This is things like your asset list, where your devices are, geographically where your devices are. Okay, what's your threat? What are the care packs and the warranties on it? What firmware is the hardware running at, and do you need to patch it? When do you need to patch it? That's your documentation. Get on top of that stuff. Determine the level of logging required. If you do have a breach, the first thing that either you or your partner may want to do will be a forensic investigation. And what we mean by that is basically digging into all the logs and all the information that we can get. So going back to that earlier point about having a central place to manage switching and wireless and servers and all the bits and pieces, that speeds this process up, because you can go and grab the logs and say, well, this attack happened by logging in via the wireless. It then traversed across these switches. We can see that these particular requests were made. It tried to access these ports. Apologies, that's a bit technical, but it sent this data, etc., etc. We will gather as much of that information as you possibly can as a partner, and then understand how it happened. It's great to be able to go to the senior management team and say, look, we've been hacked, or we've been breached, or whatever it is that's occurred. But actually, the next question is always, well, what's happened then? What data's been leaked? What's occurred? How did they do it? How do we stop it from happening again? So that's about forensic information. So how much logging do you need inside your environment to be able to answer that question? Build an incident response plan. If you couldn't answer that last question I said, which is what would you do in the event of a breach, then you need to build an incident response plan. This details who issues need to be escalated to. Do we need to reach out to the head teacher at 12 o'clock in the morning or whatever? So, or 1 o'clock in the morning might make more sense. But who do we need to engage with? The point is, actually, we're not too worried about that bit. The important bit is how quickly you're reporting this to things like the ICO. When do you engage with the police? When do you engage with cybercrime units? Things like that. So also, what's your response to the parents going to be? Okay, maybe, I mean, there was one school that their entire door entry system was running across the network, and they were breached. The network went down, the doors didn't open. All right, school was closed. Okay, obviously there were physical ways of getting into the school, and they managed to do things on paper, but they're a whole lot of pain in the morning. Okay, so think about these things. Maybe that's part of your risk assessment. Actually, our door entry systems run across our network. So bear that in mind. Build a plan. And if you need some help doing a plan, work with your cyber partner to be able to move that forward. All right. We talk about antivirus, anti-malware, things like that. If you are using antivirus technologies at the moment, I encourage you to step that on now. All right. Antivirus is sort of aging. Unfortunately, lots of people have signed 3-5-year contracts with antivirus providers. But the latest technology we should be looking at today is something called EDR, okay, endpoint detection response. That is a behavioral-based antivirus. The aim of this is to be much more adaptive and be able to react to threats far quicker than an antivirus signature-based antivirus solution will be able to react to it. It really is the de facto standard for what we would know as antivirus, maybe called next-gen antivirus, somewhere in the middle. But an EDR solution, it really is where you need to be getting to. And that is installed on all your devices and all your endpoints, and is a much better place to be in the event of an issue occurring. This reports back into a central platform. You get visibility across your entire estate as well. If you are moving into the cloud and using cloud services, think about XDR. Okay, this is about what's happening on your network, what's happening on your WAN connection, what's happening in Microsoft, what's happening in your Google estate. Are people logging in from all over the place? If you've got kind of threats and people abusing passwords from Colombia without pointing fingers or anything like that. Okay, so check your XDR solution. If you move to the cloud, that's really the next security layer. So talk to your cyber partner about that if it's a new term to you. And MDR stands for Managed Detection and Response, and that's about having a SOC team, right? It's about proactively looking at threats when somebody does log in from a foreign country using a password and the password's been got wrong 5 times. Who picks that up? How do you know that happens? Okay, being on top of that stuff. When a threat occurs on a device, on a desktop, how do you stop that from moving forward? All right, when it does start going AWOL inside your business, you want someone to proactively jump on and terminate it before it gets any further. Bear in mind that a virus is great, but actually most threats today, in many cases, are either bots or human beings that are actually thinking about how they're going to traverse and navigate around your network. Okay, so they just get picked up by an antivirus solution. Web and mail filtering. Many of you will have web filtering. Hopefully you've got a good solution in place for your web filtering. That's been around and a requirement for a long time. But mail filtering, you've got to remember that over 90% of all cyber attacks start with an email phishing. Okay, this is people clicking on links inside emails. That comes back to training and et cetera, et cetera. But actually, the mail filtering side of things, it's not just enough just to have your Microsoft 365 do your mail filtering, all right? It does do a certain level of it. You do have some licensing to step that up within the Microsoft estate, so you can get better mail filtering solutions. And there's also some great third-party services that can do that. So engage again with your partner, look at some third-party services, and make sure your mail filtering is up to scratch. If you can get that right, then you're immediately going to cut out 90% of your risk. Probably a bit unfair to say that, but a pretty substantial part of the risk that you face. Refer to safeguarding guidelines. Remember that document earlier? We were talking about how to keep students safe. There's lots of information in there as well. Let's go and look at that. Third-party patching, another key one. All right, if you're doing your Windows patches and your Windows updates, that's brilliant. But bear in mind that generally a threat, if it comes in, it isn't going to try and go after Windows. All right, it's going to look for your Adobe PDF reader that's 15 versions out of date, because you've been patching Windows, you've been patching all the operating system, but you've got a really out of date version of Adobe Reader or a really out of date version of Google Chrome. And it will exploit vulnerabilities inside that software, these third-party apps. So make sure you've got a third-party patching strategy. And again, software vendors, providers, bits and pieces out there that you can engage with to get that going. And then thirdly, backup, right? Great. Make sure you've got backups, obviously, of all your estate. Make sure you've got your cloud backups that are as important as your on-prem backups. But please do not think that that's your answer to cybersecurity. If we get breached, we'll just restore our backups. The chances are you restore your backups. That's great. You're now back up and running again. And trust me, within 3 hours, all the exploits and vulnerabilities and issues that the reason you got hacked in the first place, you haven't fixed any of that. So you'll just get hacked again 3 hours later. Okay. So you need to understand where your vulnerabilities are. You need to understand where, kind of what's a threat to you as a school and how you remediate those things. So cyber is a big conversation. It's something that schools are starting to take seriously. Sadly, it is quite an expensive requirement. It's worth saying that if you've not got a budget for cyber, from a senior management perspective, we need to start thinking about laying a budget for cyber solutions to make sure the school's safe. Reputational and financial damage can be pretty considerable, as I'm sure you've seen in the news. Right, last one, digital governance, digital leadership standards and accessibility. So this is really where we're asking you to engage with your senior leadership team. Okay, so sadly, we see lots of kind of schools and establishments where the IT manager kind of feels like he knows what he needs to do, or she knows what she needs to do. But the issue we have is that getting the voice heard at the senior management team level can be a bit of a struggle sometimes. So if you are an IT manager or a leader within the organization, and you're failing to get the severity of cyber and some of these IT and this digital strategy and governance across, then point your senior management team at the DfE's website and these guidelines. Okay, hopefully that will give you a platform to at least go and talk about it. But the really important thing is that you need to make decisions. You need things that are going to change. A lot of the requirements to shift things on are policy driven, and you may or may not be in a position to drive that policy. So you really need to get someone senior within the organisation that is able to do that. So see if you can assign an SLT member to take on the ownership of the technology strategy. Okay. Obvious one, they're asking you here again, DfE are asking you to keep registers relating to hardware and systems up to date. That's your asset register. That's kind of a no-brainer. I'm sure you're all over it already, but very important. Include digital technology within disaster recovery and business continuity plans. The school will have some sort of business continuity plan. You may not call it a business continuity plan, but what happens in the event of a flood? What happens in the event of a fire? What happens in the event of our door entry system not working? All right, these are business continuity plans. How do we keep the school running in the event of an issue? Cyber breach should be one of those things, and if it's not, or technology outage, server being down, whatever it might be, toilet pipes flooded all over the server rack, there should be a plan in place for what we're going to do. And this is the governance side of it, all right, making sure that we've got a plan, everyone knows what they're going to do, and everyone acts upon it. And that really needs to be driven by the senior management team. And obviously have a digital technology strategy that's reviewed every year. So that's what all of this stuff is wrapped up into is one overarching digital technology strategy. So the last piece that I want to talk about is accessibility standards, something that's really important to me. I was an IT manager of school for many, many years before I joined the MSP world. And I worked in an environment where we had a special education needs and disability section, and that was really important to me. All right, the end goal here was to make sure that everybody we were working with some great technology that allowed some of the students that were struggling to engage with technology. It gave them the tools to be able to embrace their learning. The issue we had was the technology wasn't very good sort of 15 years ago. Now it's incredible. So some of the stuff that I see, some of the stuff that Microsoft and Google have baked in is incredible. So it's all about making sure that we're putting accessibility first. And this is an important thing from the DfE, all right? They're saying you need to think about accessibility. You need to appreciate that not everybody can engage with technology the same way. So making sure that it's front and center in a lot of your new policies and strategies is there. Hardware and software should support the use of accessibility features, and communication should be accessible to all. Okay, really, really important. So ways of achieving that, obviously the best people in the school to talk to are probably the SEN department themselves. So they will have a good understanding of the challenges that students may be facing. And we talk about students, it might be that the staff that are struggling to engage with some of the technology. You know, lots of digital media can be tiny little print. How do we make that a bit bigger for our, I'll be horrible, but for our slightly older, maybe perhaps slightly older members of staff like me, that their vision is going. So, so maybe we need to find ways of engaging and changing the way we engage. Leverage accessibility tools and software. Brilliant accessibility stuff, you know, built into Microsoft. You've got immersive reader technology. Like, if you've not seen that, definitely go and look at it. Embracing the Microsoft and Google state. So a lot of this stuff is baked in. They're doing this as standard. Accessibility is key to them. Look to assistive technology partners. So there's lots of tools out there that, and bits of hardware and devices that students can plug into laptops to aid hearing, so that it amplifies the sound of the teacher at the front of the room, directional, all sorts of stuff like that. Great lights now that actually flicker on books to help read and actually show an improvement in reading. So loads and loads of assistive technology, that's really cool. But importantly, remember that if a student is struggling to engage, they're not in one classroom all day. They do move around the school. They are engaging with other teachers. So everybody across the school needs to have a bit of an understanding of that accessibility requirement. Right? So you'll be glad to hear, whilst this was not anywhere near as fun as our normal conversations that we do, and lots of fun demos, and we're talking about AI and top tips inside Microsoft 365, this is a really important conversation, all right? So DfE standards are key. We do need to start looking to try and align to them. Hopefully you realize the importance of cyber. There's some great guidance there. Hopefully you're aware you need to sort your backup lines out if you've only got one backup line. Hopefully you all are aware of the servers and the laptops and the devices and the requirements. But if you have got any questions that you want to fire at me, please go ahead and do that. But if you haven't, then I really appreciate you joining me. And you are welcome to run away. I would say to a sunny day, but it's not particularly sunny out there. So, but if you've got anything, please fire away. But thank you very much for joining me. Lovely, no questions. Always the way. I'm going to start making questions up, I think. Right, no problem at all. So thank you very much then, everybody. We will call it a day there. If you've got any, if you do have anything that you want to fire at us, please reach out to your account manager or get in touch with us via the website. If you want to reach out to me, you can find me on various social media platforms. It's not a problem. So, and I'm happy to engage and have a chat. If you need some help around your cyber, obviously we are a cyber partner, so make sure you come and talk to us. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.